شاهنامه خوانی هر آن کس که شاهنامه خوانی کند، چه مرد و چه زن پهلوانی کند. نقالی بیژن و منیژه فردوسی دلش تنگ می شود، از جای می جنبد و از یار و همسر مهربانش اندر سرایش چراغی می خواهد و آن مهربان رخشنده شمعی می آورد و نارنج و ترنج و بهی دل به دل حکیم طوس می سپارد و از دفتر باستان داستانی می خواند و فردوسی از آن داستان برگرفته شده از دفتر پهلوی شعری نغز می سازد. طبعش آراسته می گردد و راز پوشیده بیژن و منیژه را در می یابد و سراسر داستان را به شعر در می آورد. چو کیخسرو آمد به کین خواستن، جهان ساز نخواست آراستن. بارگاه کیخسروی به زیر پای دلاوران رزم آزموده ایرانی می لرزد. فریبرز، کاووس، گستهم، گودرز کشواد و گرگین میلاد همگی در درگاه کیخسرو حاضرند. ناگهان از پس پرده دار به نزد کیخسرو هوشیار می آید و از حضور ارمانیان همان مرزداران ایران و توران خبر می دهد که بر در سرای کیانی به دادخواهی آمدند. گراز آمد اکنون فزون از شمار، گرفتان همه بیشه و مرغزار. به دندان چو پیلان، به تان همچو کوه، شده شهر ارمان از ایشان فتوح. کس از انجمن هیچ پاسخ نداد، مگر بیژن گیو فرخ نژاد. من اسب من آماده کنید، لباس رزم منو بیارید. لباس رزم آوردن، چه لباس رزمی همه پولادین. ساق بند پا، ساعد بند به دست، زره به تن، کلاه خود به سر. به 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 چه جوون ایرانی بیژن گیو. اسب منو بیارید. اسب آوردن، دهنه اسب گرفت، پا گذاشت به رکاب، نشست بر خامه زین. ترق 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 کوه ها رو رفتن بالا و دره ها رو سرازیر شدن. بعد از 4 روز ایست همینجا خیمه میزنید، خیمه ها رو برپا کنید. بیژن تا این همه گراز و در دشت دید، از خشم خونش به جوش آمد. چو بیژن به بیشه برافکند چشم، بجوشید خونش به تن برز خشم. این همه گراز در این دشت دارن محصولات اینا رو خراب میکنن. گرگین تا برو اون رو بره رودخونه، من تیر پرتاب میکنم. اگر گرازی از زیر تیر من رد شد، تو با گرز میزنی تو سرشون اونا رو میکشی. برو تا به نزدیک آن آبگیر، چون من با گراز اندر آیم به تیر. گرگین تا این حرفو شنید مگه قول و قراراتون با کیخسرو یادتون نیست؟ پول و مقام و زر و طلا به تو میرسه، من فقط اومدم راهو نشونت بدم. بیژن تا این حرفو شنید بهش برخورد، به غرور پهلوانیش برخورد. میدونین چرا؟ میدونین بیژن کیه؟ آخه اون پسر گیو و بانو گشسبه، نوه دختری رستمه. بیژن کم نیاورد، خودش یه تنه رفت به جنگ گرازها، کمانو گرفت، تیر گذاشت به چله کمان، کشید و رها کرد. تیر اول یک گراز افتاد زمین، تیر دوم یک گراز دیگه، تیر سوم، تیر چهارم، باران تیر بر کله گرازان بارید. ناغافل از پشت یک گرازی بیامد شهریمنا، زره را بدرید بر بیژن. بیژن خنجر رو کشید، گذاشت زیر شکم گراز، کشید و پاره کرد. گراز به زمین افتاد، سر از تنش جدا کرد. دشت غرق در خون، شرح این هجران و این خون جگر، این زمان بگذر تا وقت دگر.
Thank you very much. It was an amazing way to start this sort of flagship event for this collaboration between PRISA, the Policy Research Institute for South Asia, and the work that we're doing here at Brunel University with the it's the South Asia Studies Research Group of Brunel, where I'll talk a little bit more about this later. But thank you so much for joining us today. And it's my honour and privilege to introduce this speaker and to start this event, especially joining us for this important question: can South Asian Muslims succeed in the UK today? But firstly, I should say, a little bit about myself. I'm Luke Heslop. I'm an anthropologist here in the Department of Social and Political Sciences, and I am one of the directors with Jisen and Hurry of PRISA, the think tank. And I have lived and worked in South Asia for quite some time, as well as doing the policy research things. I and the Brunel South Asia Research Group, I co-host a podcast with Professor James Staples over there called The Migration Menu, in which we kind of do a lot of work out in the community, in the diaspora communities around West London, from sort of Hounslow to Harrow. Now, a quick overview of the research centre at Brunel. We have quite a unique set of academics and scholars working in various parts of this university, whether it's in STEM, whether it's in social and political sciences, whether it's in arts and humanities. And what the research group has tried to do is centralise all of this expertise knowledge and focus it around the theme of South Asia, and whether it's to do with health outcomes, education outcomes, nutrition or entrepreneurship and business. We try to direct our skill set towards the needs of the community in an attempt to kind of open the university up to its immediate surroundings in a way that feels quite novel and exciting. So we've built this collaboration with PRISA, who work closely with policy actors and researchers, and within the region and its diasporas, to talk about migration, politics, urban change and social transformation, and the kind of cultural dynamics of everyday life, which makes Brunel, situated where it is a sort of, they call it the beacon on the hill in this part of London. It makes Brunel very well placed for us to use our lecture theatres, use our facilities, use the campus as a kind of, not just as a centre for excellence and research, but a place where we can bring communities together to have important conversations such as this one. So this is a question that's deeply layered and urgent. It speaks to long histories of exclusion and racialization. And we want to shift that conversation to talk about the kind of hope and the creative possibilities that are etched against some structural inequalities carved out of the late 20th century. For young Muslim men in particular, dominant stories are too often framed negatively. So we urgently want to hear more positive stories, and that's what I'm really looking forward to this conversation today. And we're incredibly lucky to be joined this evening by Mohammed Amin, whose work has opened up some of these really crucial conversations about identity, success and representation, and particularly within British Muslim communities. So Mohammed Amin, if I've got the Wikipedia right, has been listed as one of the 100 most influential Muslims in the UK. And in this talk, we're going to hear a little bit about, I believe, Amin's personal journey and successful journey into business as well, with Price Waterhouse UK and working in Islamic finance. So he's a very distinguished guest, and we're very lucky to have him kicking off this first talk of the series. So without further ado, I'll hand over and say thank you very much. If we just give an applause to our speaker.
Yes. Good afternoon. I've known Zishan Hashim for less than a year, but we've already had some stimulating conversations. I was trying to choose the word very carefully because on some issues we have disagreed so strongly that we've simply had to agree to disagree. What I'm thinking about is the question which we were discussing when I was looking through a paper that he sent me, a paper by somebody else, and whether politicians engage in political activity for their own interests or for other sort of social welfare interests that they wish to advance. And we simply could not agree on that point at all. So today, the subject of the talk emerged from a long Zoom conversation that we had, because he wanted me to speak here, but we needed to think about what was I going to talk about, and eventually we converged on this question. So this is what I'm going to cover. I've got a short version of the talk. I then got some data, not a lot of data, but I have some data. And what I'm really most interested in talking about is what determines success. Why do some people succeed and not others? And this is something I've thought a great deal about personally. I'm now 74 years old, so I've had a long perspective. And I talk regularly to schools for a charity called Speakers for Schools. And that's one of the questions that in more than about 3/4 of my talks, I ask the pupils to think about while I'm speaking, because I tell them my views on how they can succeed in life, but I want them to think about what success means. Why do some people succeed and not others? And then the most important and most worthwhile part of the afternoon will be the Q&A and discussion, when you can challenge me on anything I've said. You can ask me about what I talked about, or you can ask me about anything else you want to talk about. No questions are off limits. I can't guarantee to answer every question, but nothing's off limits. So, the short version of my talk. Question: can South Asian Muslims succeed in the UK? And the operative word in this question is actually can. That's the most important word. And my degree's in mathematics, and I'm not very good at the sort of linear algebra that we used to study, but the fundamental basics of logic are still there. The opposite of this proposition would be South Asian Muslims can't succeed in Britain. And therefore, to prove that they can, I only need one example. Don't even need two examples. One will suffice. So here is my example. Saranwar Pervez migrated to the UK from South Asia in 1956. I think from Pakistan by then, although I can't guarantee, but most of his business interests are Pakistan related, so I'm pretty sure it's Pakistan. And he went into business, and by 2020 he was worth 3.1 billion. I can't remember if he's been put into the House of Lords, but he's certainly been knighted. Does anybody think that this person is not a success? Nobody. So, case closed. That's the end of the lecture. South Asian Muslims can succeed in the UK. No, I'm quite serious. That actually proves the point. I'm not putting myself in the same class as Saranwar Pervez. For a start, he's about 1,000 times richer than I am. But I was born in Pakistan back in 1950. I came to the UK in 1952, aged less than 2. My parents were illiterate and extremely poor. I did a degree in maths from Cambridge, became a chartered accountant, and in 1990, I became the second ethnic minority person and the first Muslim to become a partner in Price Waterhouse in the UK. Later on, I was elected in 2003 to the firm's supervisory board. That's a board of 15 partners that basically keeps an eye on the top management, a bit like a non-executive board of directors for a public company. 2016, I was really pleased to get an MBE for services to community cohesion and interfaith relations, because one of my many voluntary roles is I'm the co-chair of the Muslim Jewish Forum of Greater Manchester. The most important thing on this page is actually my website, mohammedamin.com. When I retired, I taught myself how to build a website at the age of 59, and it's got over 800 pages, and there's a whole section of the website with the title Success Tips, where I put on lots of thoughts of mine on how to succeed in life, from really important things to pretty trivial things. For example, how to tie your shoelaces. Quite serious. I didn't realize until about 2 years ago that all my life I've been tying my shoelaces wrong. And I watched a video on YouTube. I can't remember how I came to this video. It must have been via Twitter or something. And since then, I started tying my shoelaces differently, and now they never come undone. So I decided to share that on my website. Saves you a few minutes, might save you from getting a broken neck. So, some data. Data is the least interesting thing from my point of view, because you can all go out and find it for yourselves, either by doing your own searching or by using tools that will search for you. And in fact, one of the changes I made to my own life this year, I don't make many New Year's resolutions, but my New Year's resolution this year was to make more use of AI. And I decided if I was going to use it, I should actually start paying for it. So I have signed up to pay, I think it's $20 a month for perplexity.ai. And the great thing about that, unlike other AI tools, is that when you do a search, when you ask it a question, it always gives you the sources that it's consulted. So you can find endless amounts of data by using a tool like that. But I've got a little bit which I would like to share with you. I get fed up when I talk to younger Asians when they say how terrible racial and religious discrimination in this country is, and agree it's terrible, and that it's getting worse, because that is simply incorrect. There have been social studies going on for decades where they ask people the same question all the time and track the results. Now, this chart is not a longitudinal chart. This is a different graph, but it's based upon the same kind of data. And the thing that I've cited, I mean, the slides will be readily available to everybody. They can be emailed to you if you ask for them afterwards. But what caught my eye about this graph was this is a graph based upon people's attitudes as measured in 2013, but classified by when they were born. So that these are views of people who in 2013 were quite old. They were born before 1940, and these are people who were very young. And several things catch your eye when you look at that. First of all, people are much more tolerant if they are younger, more recently born, than if they're older. And this replacement of old people by young people is a big factor in the long-term decline of racial prejudice. Some people may change their attitudes and become more tolerant as they get older, but a big part of it is that the intolerant ones just keep dying out while more tolerant younger people are being born. The other thing that is striking about this graph is how much higher the green line is. That's dislike of Muslims, people who would reject if a close relative wanted to marry a Muslim, compared to other things like disliking black African people or disliking Asians or East Europeans. The reality about life in Britain is that until about 1988 or 89, no white person in this country really cared that I was a Muslim. It was just an utter irrelevancy to them. If they didn't like me, it was because I was brown-skinned and of Pakistani or South Indian origin, rather than, as I said, it was irrelevant to them that I was a Muslim. What changed was Muslims behaving badly. Initially, with the Salman Rushdie affair, marches in places like Bradford, burning books on the street, that's when I became Muslim in the eyes of white people. Before that, it was utterly irrelevant. And of course, since then, we've had things like 9/11, the London bombings, ISIS, with so many examples of deplorable Muslim behavior around the world. It is no surprise to me, anyway, that many people are prejudiced against Muslims. Prejudice is entirely wrong. The actions of ISIS are nothing to do with actions of me, but this is real life and human nature. that is the only actual real data that I'm going to present. I've got some anecdata for you. And this is something that I particularly focus on because I've done a talk on several occasions, which you can find on my website in the videos section, about how Britain has changed in my lifetime. I did it initially for one school in Macclesfield, and then I had to repeat it on a few occasions. And I do look at quite a lot of data in that, and one of the things I'm really interested in is how education has changed in this country. So when I was a teenager going to university, I went in 1969, but the data I got is from 1970. A tiny proportion, 8.4% of my age group would go on to university. Now, by the way, that percentage is about 50% for the national age group. But what is really striking is that I grew up in Manchester with a group of randomly selected Pakistani origin Muslims. The only selection that they had was that our parents knew each other and we all lived in the same slum in Manchester. And about half of those people, even though most of them were very poor, although some were actually even then quite rich, because my best friend, his father was the richest Pakistani in Manchester, while mine was dead poor. About half of them went on to university, which I thought was really striking and worth sharing, because immigrants tend to be much more aspirational than the natives. So now on to the most interesting thing about this talk, certainly from my perspective, and the most useful thing, I think, from your perspective. Because, as I said, after 74 years of life, I think I understand a lot better what actually contributes to people succeeding in life, in business, in careers, and why people fail. Because I've seen below me, much younger people, you hire somebody from university, first-class honours degree in mathematics, really bright, really promising, and then their career tails away, while other people go on to be very successful. What's different between them? I'm really old-fashioned. This is the title of a page on my website, and that's the URL. I wrote that page after I'd done a talk in Manchester at the British Muslim Heritage Centre about Islamic finance. Big audience, a couple of hundred people, and afterwards, is when you do talks, people come up to you and talk to you. And one of the young guys was asking me a question. We chatted for a few minutes. Then I asked him, "Do you mind if I ask you a personal question?" He said, "No, carry on." "Were you born in this country?" "Yes, I was." "Why do you speak English with an Asian accent?" And he was floored. He wasn't floored because he didn't have an answer to the question why. He was floored because he didn't even know that he spoke English with an Asian accent. None of his teachers at school had ever said anything to him. It's politically incorrect. His friends were all Asians, and so he was utterly unaware of it. And the brutal reality is that no matter how unfair it may seem, other people assess you and judge you all the time in life. And frankly, if you speak English with an Asian accent, using exactly the same words that, say, I might use, people will think that you're less intelligent, just because your accent is Asian. It also applies to white people. If you're white and you speak Scouse, that's the accent from Liverpool, people look down on you. And it may be unfair, but it's the real world. When I went to university, I didn't know it, but I had a very strong Manchester Mancunian accent. All my friends noticed it straight away as soon as I started talking. Somewhere in the 3 years I spent at Cambridge, because I was hanging around with lots of other people who were not from Manchester, I just lost my accent. I have a sort of ear, I think it comes from growing up bilingual. I spoke Punjabi at home with my parents. At school I spoke English. And so I'm just more attuned to accents and the way that people speak. And whenever I spend time with anybody, I start talking like them. So it really is worth thinking about. And not just spoken English, but also written English. I've worked quite closely with highly educated people of, for example, Pakistani origin, who I'm not going to name. And they've got doctorates, and they can write really high quality papers in economics, but they regularly make mistakes choosing between the words "a" and the word "the" when they're writing their English. Because that's the kind of thing that is hardest to learn and get right if you're not a native English speaker. But it really does make a difference in how people receive what you write. And it's really worth putting in the effort to change that. The spoken English is actually quite easy. You spend lots and lots of time listening to BBC Radio 4. The more you listen to BBC Radio 4, the more you will speak like BBC Radio 4. And frankly, you will succeed more in life if you speak like BBC Radio 4 than if you don't. Written English, just read lots and lots of high quality written English. Literature, for example. The next one is a bit of human psychology. People behave, on average, the way that you expect them to behave. If you assume that random strangers can be trusted, occasionally you'll be disappointed, but most of the time they will prove themselves to be trustworthy. If you think that people are untrustworthy, they will behave in untrustworthy ways. It's really peculiar. I think it's something about the vibes that we send out when we have attitudes in ourselves and other people sense them and they behave accordingly. And if you expect people to be hostile to you, for example, if you're going for a job interview, if you expect to be discriminated against, being honest about it, you will be discriminated against. I never suffered from that, partly because I was such a small minority. My secondary school, for example, we had about 150-year group entry every year group, 5 forms of 30 people each. And each year there'd be 1 or 2 ethnic minority people and everybody else would be white. So you just got used to living in an all-white environment. It's actually harder for young people today because they've got larger Asian sort of peer groups. So I was never conscious in that sense of being different. Similarly, when I applied to Cambridge, because I really wanted to study theoretical physics, mathematics at Cambridge, the one thing that never occurred to me to even ask myself is, will they not let me in because I am brown? Never thought about it. Your level of preparation and readiness and the exam itself. In that sense, I found it harder than papers I was doing as degree exams. Obviously, the academic level was higher at the degree exams, but so was your preparation. So I arrived for the interview, and I only saw one other candidate that day. He was white, he was from a public school, and I'm pretty sure he didn't get a place. I can't guarantee it, but 9 months later, when we turned up, the new 100 sort of undergraduates at Clare College, which is the college I went to, I wouldn't have recognized him necessarily, but I can guarantee he would have recognized me because there were so few brown faces there around. So Clare College chose to give me a place rather than him. I have no reason to believe that they would ever want to discriminate. And I got really annoyed with our former Prime Minister, Gordon Brown, when he kicked up a massive fuss, about 20 years ago now, when some white working class girl was denied a place at Oxford, even though she had lots of A's at A-level, because he felt Oxford was discriminating against sort of working class people, when the reality is that everybody that applies to Oxford has just as good A-levels. And from knowing Clare College inside out, not just when I was an undergraduate, because I'm on the Alumni Council, I regularly meet the college's master, etc. I've had presentations about how keen Clare is to encourage applications from disadvantaged pupils. They bend over backwards to take people from diverse ethnic minority backgrounds. But I can understand the psychology. I mean, one of the really weird experiences I had was when I was 63. At that stage, I was retired. I was a member of the Carlton Club, which is a posh club on St James's Street in London, associated with the Conservative Party. And I joined a Conservative dining club called the 1900 Club, and black tie dinners. Well, that's okay, I've got a dinner jacket. And the very first 1900 Club dinner I walked into, when you're having the initial sort of drinks before you sit down, I didn't know anybody there at all. And you do feel very strange at first. Then you walk up, you find somebody that you talk to, a complete stranger, and you get a conversation going. So I can understand how people, if they come from an ethnic minority background, feel uncomfortable in strange all-white environments, but you just have to get over it. This one is based again on my real-life experience at Price Waterhouse Coopers, and in the 2000s. So we had, I mean, when I first started at PwC, Price Waterhouse in 1987, that we had very, 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 very few ethnic minority people. We had 25 people in the Manchester tax department. I might have been the only ethnic minority person in the tax department. I joined as a senior manager from outside. But by then, we had quite a few. And in particular, I remember one of our members of staff who was a Muslim hijabi, and whenever you saw her, she had her head down, she was working. She never, ever went to any of the events, never went to any socials. And when it came round to doing pay rises, as a partner, the partners sit down in a meeting and go through all members of staff, their evaluations, promotions, pay rises, etc. And there were a number of ethnic minority people at that time. And individually, every decision we made about whether they were white or brown, I agreed with. When I looked at the decisions afterwards in the round, the ethnic minority people had got smaller pay rises and fewer promotions, even though I agreed with every single individual decision. And I talked about it with the partner in charge of the tax department afterwards, and we agreed. I mean, it was weird. It wasn't that the firm was choosing to discriminate. I was sitting there in the confidential discussions, person by person. And at that time, I was on the supervisory board, and we even had discussions about it at the supervisory board, because we started improving our data gathering nationally. I had a role in getting PwC to improve its data gathering for individual staff in terms of ethnic profiling and so on. And the great thing about data is it tells you things. PwC could prove, without doubt, that we were equal opportunity recruiters. If you applied to join PwC, we had data to show that you were just as likely to get in, regardless of your ethnic background, provided you had equal levels of qualifications and experience. Initially, our data on our own staff was terrible because a lot of the staff had been there a long time before data gathering started. So we used to be in this stupid situation where newspapers like Accountancy Age would contact all the big accounting firms saying, how many ethnic minority partners have you got? And we would have to say, we have none, even though we had loads of them, because we couldn't prove, who was who. So we decided to get really serious about internal data gathering. So we put a self-profiling questionnaire in front of our annual selection of the flexible benefits package. So every member of staff and every partner had to confront the questionnaire once a year. And our data went from being hopeless to being perfect overnight, or over a couple of years. Once we had good data, we knew at a national level that if you were an ethnic minority in PwC nationally, you were going to get promoted more slowly and leave more quickly. That's the bad news. The good news is that at least we knew about it as top management, and we were able to do something about it, and we were starting to do something about it by the time that I left. But I was really pleased about 2-3 years ago now, reading the firm's annual report, to find that PwC no longer has an ethnic minority pay gap. Ethnic minorities at PwC now are as senior and paid as highly as white people. And the same is true for partners as well. But it's really important to socialize, and there's a whole page on my website about the importance of attending work-related social events. Because if people don't know who you are, they're not going to work with you as effectively. And if they don't work with you as effectively, your career will suffer. It's as simple as that. The other thing I've been thinking about over the years is, what does it mean to be good at your job? Without wanting to sound boastful, I had very strong technical skills. When I was a newly qualified tax person at Arthur Andersen, I was really, really good at solving tax problems. I was brilliant at it. I was hopeless at talking to clients. I was hopeless at trying to do man management. I just didn't have those kinds of skills. My background was such that I hadn't gained it. And as the years go by, you have to learn the hard way. Because the more senior you get, the more other skills start to matter. Technical skills never go away. That's why there's still some blue up there at the top. But it's the other skills that start to matter more and more. And some of them are innate, some of them you gain by thinking about it, by practice, by study, by learning, by going on courses, but they really, really matter. And they can be very peculiar skills as well sometimes. So, do you need high levels of knowledge of British history or Shakespeare or the Bible to be a tax partner? You would assume not. But if you're going to have dinner with your client, the one thing your client does not want to talk about over dinner is international tax involving his company. He wants to talk about other things. In my 23 years at Price Waterhouse UK, for most of that time, my most important client was an American multinational, the UK part of that American multinational. And the UK was sufficiently important to this American multinational that the worldwide head of tax was regularly in the UK. And the worldwide head of tax was somebody who was a tax lawyer, and he was a Reform Jew, or a liberal Jew, I think one of those two. And we used to have fascinating conversations over dinner about everything under the sun, nothing to do with tax, but my ability to have those conversations was critically dependent on my knowledge of things like this. And again, I have a really concrete piece of advice. There's a magazine that I discovered when I was an undergraduate at Clare College, Cambridge, in 69 to 72, called the New York Review of Books. And on and off for the rest of my life, I have subscribed to it. I've had gaps when I'm not subscribed because you get behind, and I'm presently about a year behind with my copies. But it's the most amazing magazine because it reviews books, but it reviews books of all kinds. So the range and variety of books where I've read book reviews, and sometimes even went and bought the book, is just amazing. It's a concrete piece of advice. If you ask me, how can I broaden myself? It's no good me telling you, start at page 1 of Shakespeare and keep reading until you get to the end. It doesn't work like that. But it is actually viable to subscribe to a magazine like this and read it regularly. So that's all I wanted to say. I could go on.
Yeah, I thought the range of advice from shoelace tying to the London Review of Books, there's something of the, and the learning to program, there's this kind of trend at the moment of entrepreneurs and self-improvement, particularly for very young people, pushing that message of you never stop trying to learn a new skill or improve something you think you really know, like tying your shoelaces. Something like that. It's very, very popular. So I was really interested to hear someone at your stage of the career who's already achieved all this, is still learning, still kind of looking back. I thought it was really,
I've got a thought on that. And as I said, getting older makes a big difference. I know where that comes from. My parents were completely and totally uneducated. As a consequence, they were never, ever able to help me in any way with anything that I had to do with school. Homework. You could never ask your parents, and it makes you incredibly self-reliant. And that's where it comes from.
So I've got a challenge.
Yep.
A minor one. There's a picture that you've painted here where a lot of what you had worked towards, these improvements and the challenges of a negative mindset around battling a negative mindset about fitting in and aspiring in particular kinds of ways, learning Shakespeare. There's a trajectory of life of going to university, going to Cambridge University, going to get a job in a company like PwC, that offers a kind of energy and dynamism and a route and a vision. There's a target that you can go for there that's widely accepted, and there are things along the way. But for young people today, for whom university is not seen as the option that it once was, and where the world of work is also becoming more and more challenging, what do you think success looks like? What do you see as the main challenges for success for young people in the face of these grand institutions being somewhat diminished in 2025?
I spoke to a school in West London near Barnes, and the topic I picked, because they let me pick my own topic, was for the kids, will you be poorer than your parents? And the good news is, I said to them, that no, you won't. But the bad news is that robots will do just about everything. I mean, almost everything. And I've never forgotten a science fiction novel that I read when I was late teens or early 20s, called The Naked Sun by Isaac Asimov. And it's actually a detective story, but I won't bother you with the detective plot. But it's set on a planet, Solaria, which has about 20 million humans and about 200 million robots. And all the humans live like ancient Romans in their villas with vast numbers of robot servants for them, because the robots do everything. And that, in reality, is the future that I see coming. I mean, people just underestimate the pace at which AI is developing. And when you have AI and actually it's inside a physical thing that can move around as efficiently and effectively at climbing stairs. Remember, Daleks couldn't go up the stairs. That used to be a problem in Doctor Who, or it helped humans. When robots can actually move as flexibly, they can do everything. And so what will give your own life meaning? It's not that you'll be hungry, because there'll be an endless cornucopia of goods and services provided by this sort of economic system where the robots do everything. But what will give your life meaning? And that's a really scary problem. It's also a problem faced by everybody who retires, which is why so many people are afraid to retire, because they're worried about becoming a sort of non-person when they don't have a job. But it's not a new problem for a tiny sliver of society, because it's a problem that has always been faced by the children of the very rich. And I gave the pupils the example of the Kennedy brothers, who, all four of them, who spent their lives in public service. Not because they wanted the pay, but because they cared. But it's a real challenge. Now, coming back to what you do, first of all, you have to ask yourself, not just what are you good at, but more important than that, what are you interested in? What do you care about? When I was at school, I wanted to be an astronomer or a theoretical physicist. My heroes were people like Einstein. And that's why I did maths at Cambridge University, because that's what you did if you wanted to be a theoretical physicist. That was what the proper sort of subject was. But I discovered at Cambridge that even though I'm pretty bright, I'll be quite honest, my IQ, when it was measured by Mensa, puts me at 1 in every 250 people. But some of the people around me doing maths with me at Clare College, I would say 1 in 1,000, 1 in 10,000. You realise you'll never be any good. So what do you do? Well, I still enjoyed 3 years at Cambridge, but I didn't know what I wanted to do career-wise, which is why I did a postgraduate certificate in education, and then I got a job teaching. But I was lucky, while I was teaching, I discovered accountancy, and I was interested in that. So that's how I ended up becoming an accountant. But if you're going to do something for 40 years of your life, it needs to be something you enjoy doing, because otherwise it's horrible. I loved my job because for 40 years I was solving complicated problems. Every day you walk into the office, you never know quite what's going to happen. You have enormous control over your environment and which things you choose to work on. The more senior you get, the more control you have. But it was always fascinating. But trying to do something that you hate just because it pays you, it's like a prison sentence.
I think it's a really interesting position, and to compare that to the formation of the modern economy, where lots of young people today, if I speak to my students, and they don't see this kind of job, career for life image. It's all about a side hustle. It's about doing 2 or 3 different things and switching career at some point as well. So where you have that element of, I guess, flexibility is a very positive way of putting it. Precarity is another way of putting it. But when you have that kind of baked in, I guess one of the questions would be, where does faith kind of come into that? If you want to think about the sort of person that you want to be in the world, it's not necessarily defined by the kind of job that you're going to be doing, because the job is a bit of a movable feast.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, the most important thing is you have to be very clear in your own mind what are things you're prepared to be flexible about, what are things you're not prepared to be flexible about. So I've always had very strong religious beliefs. They varied over the years. I've been brought up as a Muslim, became agnostic, became atheist, became a breakaway Seventh-day Adventist, and then back to being a Muslim. But certain things I've never wavered on, one of which is the importance of telling the truth. So you can imagine how horrified I was when I was about 30 at the time, and I had just had this terrible conversation with a client when I was at Arthur Andersen, and which had gone really, really badly. And then the partner was beating him up about it, and I said to the partner, okay, so how should I have handled this question about what are your hourly charge-out rates? And the partner said to me, well, you could have lied to him. And I was just horrified. I mean, because that's the one thing that I would never contemplate doing. This partner, by the way, it's really revealing that he said that to me. Later on, he ended up getting divorced because he was cheating on his wife. Later on, he had this massive bust-up because he was involved as the CFO of a public company, and they had falsified accounts. But people are consistent.
Have we got any questions from the floor? Hi.
Thank you so much for your insights and so fascinating background that your story that you've shared with us, and it actually resonates with my own story in some ways as well. But I just want to disagree in terms of the fact that it's not necessarily your skills, your education that you face when you're trying to get onto the ladder, either in an employment environment or academic environment. I turned 60 last year. 30 years ago, when I was about 29, I applied to do medicine. At that time, I was told by one of the university that I was too old. And what happened then was I knew of another colleague who was 35 that was actually accepted to undertake the medicine. So of course, that knocked me back from applying from that point. 20 years later, of course, because then I was obviously involved with caring for my kids. So I never, not only because I felt no other college or university would give me admission, because I was obviously discouraged by the response that I got. 20 years later, after second master's, again I applied to do PhD. Again, the same answer. So you just feel like rejected and despondent, and you felt that someone is making a decision about your career and there's nothing you can do about it. Well, this year, last year then, I applied for PhD to Brunel after turning 60 and been accepted. At the same time, as I'd applied for the same proposal, research proposal, to the same university where I finished my master's and rejected. And I had this series of feedback about my proposed research, when in fact it's the same topic that I've applied to Brunel. And here I am, after the age of 60 here, wanting to do my master's, to do my PhD program. And also, equally, I have a child that went to public school. All my two kids, I've only got 2 children, went to public school, private school. I've had one of them go master's, and first degree, and also MBA, and now doing law, because he couldn't get a job. He has applied on to several companies, he still cannot get a job. So I think there is some sort of barrier when people from certain backgrounds or diversity get this block or challenges to overcome in respective either to do with a job or career. But one thing from my point of view, I've always said to people, if you look at my CV, in fact, one of my managers at some point commented and said, why is it that you have this zigzag career journey? And it's because I never stopped trying to get plan A, plan B, to get to work or the destination I aspire to. Although it's taken me this length of time, but obviously I can honestly say that there are times it appears that certain people from certain background have to overcome so many challenges and hurdles to get to the point that they want to get to. And you're also talking to someone who has actually got MBE. I've been a politician, I've been a director in the NHS, but it's taking me this length of time to do this PhD program. So I think we have to continue this dialogue in terms of what you've obviously advised, but I think there is also more to it that perhaps we will never be able to overcome. And we know that there is conscious and unconscious bias in the workplace as well. And there's been a lot of research around that as well. So that is just my own issue with that.
First of all, it's undoubtedly the case that there is racial and religious discrimination around. Although I'm quite clear that it has been declining over the decades. But this is where the importance of data comes in. And one of the reasons why I'm so keen on, one of the things on my website in the politics section is an article in praise of ethnic monitoring, which I wrote, because when the days when I was Conservative, I used to read a lot of stuff on the Conservative Home website, and I also wrote a lot of stuff because I knew the editor. And I got fed up of right-wing conservatives complaining about ethnic monitoring forms. So I wrote an article explaining why it's so valuable. And I shared the experience of PwC and what high quality monitoring data did for us. And one of the things I've done in a couple of articles is a compare and contrast between the UK and France. Because France, the country of liberty, equality and fraternity, is appalling when it comes to integration, in my view. And one of the things that holds them back is that for their own historical, cultural reasons, ethnic monitoring in France is illegal. It's against French law to do it. And the historical reason is quite straightforward. In the 1930s, they had records of who was Jewish. And when the Nazis came, those records were used to deport people to death camps. So France banned ethnic monitoring. But it means you don't have data. The reality is that these organizations that you're referring to all will be keeping data. To the extent that there are doubts about them, they should be pressed to justify with their own data whether or not they can demonstrate that they're equal opportunity recruiters or not. That's why I said even in the days when PwC were actually promoting ethnic minorities more slowly and exiting them more quickly, they weren't discriminating, it's just that something about the environment inside the firm meant that they were progressing less well. As far as recruitment was concerned, we still knew from our recruitment data that we were genuine equal opportunity recruiters. Yeah.
I have a question. First of all, I want to introduce myself. I'm Shoira Jaganova. I'm originally from Uzbekistan, and I have been living in Europe almost 25 years in the Netherlands. Now I live in UK 15 years. I want to tell you a little bit about my experience, how I feel being excluded, because you mentioned several things like self-exclusion, also speaking in proper language, because I speak several languages, and it doesn't matter how you speak in English or how you speak the local language, for example, in the Netherlands, they will make you feel that you are a foreigner. And it doesn't matter what jobs you will apply. Because, in my opinion, because they have this media, and in the media they show that some Central Asian countries, they have this generalized beliefs that we are from poor countries. Well, I know quite a lot of European people, they don't know even their own history. When you ask them proper questions, they don't know about their own culture, they don't know about their own histories, and they can actually judge you based on the media, which is not right. Because we all know that we come from foreign countries, we are from a rich country, we have lots of natural resources, and we all respect our cultural backgrounds. And so when I was trying to speak local language in the Netherlands, they would look at me like, who is she? Then I was suggested that I should speak in English. When I was talking in English, they respect you because they think that, oh, if you come from England or if you speak, so they think that you're a highly educated person. So while in Uzbekistan, let's say any foreign person can come there, they can speak some kind of a broken in Uzbek or in Russian, and everybody's applauding and everybody's trying to praise them. So there is a difference of valuing things, And I was thinking, how can we actually overcome these challenges and obstacles as an immigrants, because you also mentioned in your speech that your parents were illiterate. I'm sure that your parents could speak and write in your local language, in Pakistani language.
They couldn't write. They had no Pakistani education either.
Okay, so maybe you were lucky actually because you came here when you were 2 years old. And my question, what do you feel in your heart? Do you feel like British or do you feel like Pakistani person?
What I feel in my heart is actually really, really complicated because your views of life change as you go through it, and also because I'm used to regularly speaking in the media, I've learned to be very precise. And I'm a British person who was born in Pakistan and whose religion is Muslim. And different parts of my identity matter in different environments. So It's an important part of my identity that I'm a Muslim. It's an important part of my identity that I play chess in the context where it matters. So it's all complicated. But as far as I'm concerned, Pakistan is the country where I was born. That's it. I follow its politics the same way that I follow the politics of countries like Turkey or Malaysia that I'm quite interested in, but not more so. I know that other people of Pakistani origin who go to Pakistan every year feel differently. I've never been to Pakistan since 1952, different reasons at different times in my life. And what keeps me away now, I think it's a very dangerous country to travel to in many ways. So identity is really complicated, and how we think about ourselves is very complicated. But this is my country, full stop.
So how can you position yourself in this Western culture? Because obviously, I was born in Uzbekistan and I moved to the Netherlands when I was 23 years old. Obviously, I have my own background. And when you said about self-exclusion, actually I recognize myself because when I was working in a British American company, yes, I was attending Christmas parties, but sometimes they have this on Thursdays, they would say after work, we go and we drink at the pub. I don't like to drink at the pub. So I felt that I was actually excluded because they go and drink, they go and smoke. And I don't do that because I have a different background, you know, and then you can feel that you don't belong to that group of people because they create their own, this small atmosphere, you know, group of people. But how can you force yourself? You cannot force yourself to do things what they do here because we have different background, you know.
Can I answer that question?
Yes.
I don't drink alcohol. That doesn't stop me going to the pub and drinking either sparkling water or orange juice, depending on what I feel. And I never smoked. But it doesn't stop me going.
I did, and when I was there, they were laughing at me because they said that you are in a pub, you cannot drink a tea. They start to laugh at you and they start to make mockery out of you sometimes, you know. And also, when I was working in this company, I was working 8 years as a telesales marketeer. I was trying to apply within the company to go to another department. They don't let you grow, they keep you in a lower position. And that was also not fair. Because I know that other people who were working in the company, they were getting every year awards. I never get the awards. Even so, I was generating 50 to 80 leads per day. The other people, English people, they couldn't do that. I was doing that. And they kept me in a sales position always there. And that was also not fair, you know?
Again, I can't account for the specific circumstances of your company. What I do know from working in senior levels in other firms is that companies want to promote their best people for their own business purposes. The reason why I was one of our senior partners at PwC, Kieran Pointer, who I used to see regularly because I was on the supervisory board, used to make the point that diversity isn't just a good thing to do, it's actually good for the business. Discriminating against high-performing members of staff because they're from an ethnic minority is a really dumb thing to do from a business management point of view, which is why firms like PwC don't. I said I can't account for the circumstances of your company, I don't know your facts, and I don't know other people's evaluations. But as a general point, I'm prepared to assert that most companies in this country, most big companies certainly, do not discriminate.
I think we have a question at the back as well. James, was that?
Is that me? Yes. I was just looking to see if there were. Yeah, I mean, I was thinking back actually to the original question, which was can a Muslim succeed in the UK? Which I thought of again when you made these final points in closing about your own religious journey from Islam through to agnosticism, through to atheism, through to Seventh-day Adventism, and back to Islam again. I suppose I was wondering whether that religious journey in some ways mirrored or reflected your business journey or your
No, it didn't. It made no difference to the sort of business journey because I became a Muslim again at the age of 27 when my career was just sort of developing. However, what it did do was enormously enrich me as a person, because I probably would not have bothered reading the Bible from cover to cover if I hadn't been a Seventh-day Adventist at the time. But I know how much that really deep knowledge of the Bible has benefited my ability to talk to people, to understand culture, to understand culture in many ways far more deeply than people who are white British. One of my most amusing examples of this is a dinner I had with a client who was head of tax at a company in Manchester, and she and I were having dinner, and at that stage I was getting ready to do a talk at Liverpool Limwood. That's a Jewish training thing, jointly with a Jewish barrister on conversion in Islam and Judaism. And I was going to talk about conversion in Judaism, Jewish barrister would talk about conversion in Islam. And I told her how I was going to major on the story of Ruth. And she looked at me completely vacant, because she didn't have a clue what I meant when I said I was going to talk about the story of Ruth. I said, the story of Ruth and Naomi didn't help her in the slightest. You have read the book of Ruth, haven't you? She didn't even know that there was a book of Ruth in the Old Testament. So the superficial knowledge of many people who call themselves Christian is, frightening. But actually, if you have a really deep understanding of the Bible, the more senior you go in British society, the more helpful it is. It's certainly helpful if you want to have a conversation with King Charles, for example.
Yes.
First of all, thank you very much for sharing your story with us. Actually, the first generation of any immigration, they're sacrificed, because majority of them cannot succeed, but they want. We're talking about the succeed of Southeast Asian Muslim community. We have to focus about our new generation, where we can. In my opinion, as you mentioned in your data as well, because 1970s, 8% of 8.5% of the people, they will succeed to higher education. But now it's 50%. But the main worry is how many percent of these 50% highly educated new generation get their career on base of their education? Is very low. But before was like, for example, 90% they were getting exactly on the same career what they were doing, educated. Now is that one is very low. First. Secondly, these opportunities which has been given after, I think for the last 30 or 40 years to access for the higher education in the UK is downgrade the quality of the education in the UK. That's why the high percentage we were not getting in our own career what they want. But opposite side, if we look to the other countries of Europe, for example, in Germany and Austria, there to get to the higher education is very hard. But when they get into higher education,
House of Commons, with every general election, the House of Commons looks more and more like the country as a whole in terms of ethnic minority participation. Same, if you look at the cabinets, particularly the Conservative Party has done even better than Labour when it comes to ethnic minority engagement at the highest levels. And the cabinets that people like Boris Johnson or Theresa May or Liz Truss had, incredibly diverse cabinets. Britain is a great success story when it comes to integration.
Can I? Oh, sorry. No. Please, Huri.
First of all, thank you for your insightful presentation. I really enjoyed it. I just had a question regarding the process that you went step by step to the success. Did you have a mentor for each step that you were taking? What was your guideline? Because I completely agree with you. If you want to reach somewhere, especially in UK, I have been in UK since I was 5, so I keep going, coming, raining. But I have this positive experience that whatever I aimed on in UK, I achieved it so far. And I believe that I can. But from now on, I was wondering, did you go for the mentor? How did you plan for getting where you wanted? And did you know from the beginning where you wanted to end?
Right, well, the answer to the last question is easy. No, I didn't, not in the slightest. I made a whole variety of choices, some of which I can go through in a moment, many of which were completely haphazard. So I got interested in accountancy the process is actually quite interesting. When I was at school, the careers teacher suggested accountancy, not in the slightest interest. After I finished university, didn't know what I wanted to do, and one of my father's friends wanted us to set up a business together, knitwear manufacturer or clothing manufacturing. He would do the sort of hard aspects of it, while he wanted me to handle all the paperwork and things like that, because I was educated. The only problem was that he would not sign a written partnership agreement. And while I said earlier it's important to trust people, if somebody will not sign a partnership agreement to write down the rules of the business that you're going to start with them, you cannot trust this person and you can only expect bad things from them in the future, so that business never started. But at least I was aware of accountancy, and I'd even borrowed a few books from the library to look at them, but they were deathly boring, glance at them and return them. But a bit of awareness existed. So in the half-term holiday, the first half-term holiday when I was teaching, I used to hang around public libraries a lot because they have free books you can borrow, and I wasn't rich, so I couldn't afford to buy all the books I wanted. And I picked up this book, Accounting the Basis for Business Decisions, just because the title looked interesting. You know, I'd just been walking along the stacks, read a couple of pages while I was standing there. It sounded really interesting, and it's part of the lending stock, so I borrowed it. A week later, because this was the half-term holiday, I had finished reading all 900 pages. I then borrowed and read the intermediate volume, another 900 pages, and then the advanced volume, which was shorter, about 500 pages. Really interesting. So I then decided to see if I understood this well. So I signed up to become an external exam candidate for the Associated Examining Board A-Level in Accounting. I didn't do any courses. I bought some past papers. I'd read these books, and I sat as an external candidate at school. You paid a school £10 and you could sit as an external candidate, and I got a B. But I still wasn't planning to become an accountant, because it would mean 3 more years of study, being financially dependent on my parents, etc. And it was my sister, who's 6 years younger than me, so she would have been 18 at the time, said, Mum and Dad will be perfectly happy to sort of support you if you want to train as an accountant. So in July of 1974, I decided to train as an accountant. And by then, all the big firms are full, which is why I didn't train with a big firm, even though in those days, very few people had degrees, as I've explained. So with a degree from Cambridge, big firms would have taken me, but they wanted me to wait for another year. I approached Arthur Andersen and they said, we're really interested, but only in a year's time. So I trained with a small firm because they don't recruit to fixed cycles. And the really amusing thing about Pakistani culture is that even though I was taking a pay cut from £40 a week to £24 a week, and going from being a fully qualified teacher to being a trainee accountant, my social status went up amongst the Pakistani community because they look down on teachers so much compared to accountants. And that's how I trained as an accountant. But I became an accountant because I was really interested in it. Coming back to your question about mentors, I never had any specific long-term mentor as such, but I'm extremely aware of how I benefited from advice from more senior people in the organizations that I've been in. There was, for example, a catastrophe when I was the staff person in charge of the Arthur Andersen Tax Library, and I'd agreed with the manager that I worked for that we should weed out some of the old books and throw them away. But I chose to do it the weekend before the National Senior Tax Partner was due to visit Manchester office. And I had dumped all the books we wanted to discard in the office of the manager that I was working for, because I wanted her to review my decision to throw these books away. And she was horrified. She walks in on Monday morning, there's this massive pile of books on the floor in her room, and the National Senior Tax Partner is going to do an inspection of the office. She was utterly ballistic. And it was one of the other managers who explained to me why what I'd done had been so stupid. And you learn from those kinds of things. So you learn the hard way. But And if I'd stayed at Arthur Andersen, I would never have become a partner, because there were so many skills I was lacking in terms of selling, people management, self-starting, promotion, etc. I left and joined a small firm only because I wanted different kinds of opportunities at the small firm. Big firms have lots of rules and regulations, but my experience at the small firm, which was otherwise, I mean, I took a pay cut to do it, but I did have a lot of freedom and flexibility. I learned so much operating on my own at the small firm when I was the only tax person in the firm, that it stood me in really great stead when I joined Price Waterhouse later on as a senior manager. I was very different from Price Waterhouse's other senior managers because of the small firm experience that I'd had of being a self-starter, whereas they were all used to being told what to do. So I've been incredibly fortunate in my life, but the other side of being fortunate is being willing to take those opportunities, those select, and build on them. I've met 4 of the top 15 Mormons in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And I've had a free trip to Utah to speak at a conference. All of that came about from talking to one Mormon at random at a reception, and then exchanging cards with him. When he invited me to something, attending the thing he invited me to, where I met more people, helping them. So you learn certain patterns of behavior which are positive for your personal development, for your career development. I've got nothing financially out of my relationship with the Mormons, but I've had my life enormously enriched by the people that I've met and the experiences that I've had.
I think in that story there's a nice message that could also be mapped onto the kind of ethos of the seminar series that we're trying to run here, and the kind of connections we're building through conversations with communities around the university as well, because it's exactly that. You have interesting conversations, you build connections, you build your network, and you don't know what can kind of come from that, and it's a really important part of
again, totally trivial example. At the Arthur Andersen New Manager School in Chicago, there were various lectures. There was one lecture on public speaking where at the end of the lecture, the person asks for volunteers. And you could see everybody suddenly trying to hide below the desk, while I put my hand up. And I went down to the front to give an impromptu talk with no preparation. And then after I'd done my 1-minute talk, the guy said to me, "You were swaying from side to side." Because I was. People are nervous when they're speaking, etc. But I got something out of that experience. All the people who were ducking below the desks got nothing from the process of ducking below the desk. Being willing to get engaged and try makes a massive difference whether you succeed in life or not.
Thank you.
I have another question if people are still. I just want to sort of circle back. How are we doing for time, Zishan? I see are we all right? I can make it a shorter one. Just to circle back, I've got a lot of sympathy because I myself have a big pile of, well, not New York Review of Books, but the LRB, the London Review of Books.
Yeah, it's a good book, a good magazine. I've never subscribed to that because the NYRB is better.
I can't speak to that. Yeah. But likewise, I can't keep up with reading them and all the other things I have to read and do. Yeah. But I thought it was a really interesting conversation that you had over here about accents, and in your kind of biography and life history as well, thinking about your softening your Mancunian in Cambridge.
I didn't do that deliberately; it just happened automatically.
But I think that's something that's familiar
but I'm
to
brutally
a lot of
honest.
people in Britain, such as the sort of power of BBC and received pronunciation and so on.
Yeah.
But I wonder, I'm struggling a little bit to match up the advice on the sort of the finessing language and public speaking and so on like this, to kind of be able to have these kinds of conversations to better your chances of promotion or social kind of inclusion and this sort of thing. Preparing yourself for the workplace of the future. And if I were to put that to, say, young South Asian Muslim from Brent or whatever, and say that these were the kind of things, they'd say, he'd tell me in a different kind of voice, but I don't necessarily care about that. If I'm talking languages, because I already speak Punjabi and what have you, right? It'd be another maybe. I'm talking Java. I want to learn the language of programming, and I want to learn the language of like AI because this is the future. So I guess it's marrying up that picture.
What I would say to that person
of
is
English,
this.
Just say marrying up that picture of finessing language for a very social and cultural absorption into a human workspace, but on the other hand, having a picture of the future that's so technical.
Well, I'd say several things. First of all, the Java bit, go back to the diagram I had about the different skill levels that matter as you get more senior. The Java is really important when you're a junior level programmer. When you're the head of a firm that is trying to sell that stuff and looking for venture capitalists, there's a different range of skills that are needed. And actually speaking with received pronunciation is extremely valuable. And in no way is it impairing my Muslim identity that I speak English properly rather than as opposed to speaking it with an Asian accent.
That's I think it's an important framing, isn't it? Thinking about that career stage at which these things come into significance in different ways. Do we have any more? Sorry, you had your hand up a moment ago, and I've lost the flow. Sorry to keep going. Do we have any more questions?
I think the question I wanted to ask is about this sort of the environment where we now. Well, we've seen that in the United States they are discarding the issue of diversity, inclusion, and equity. And it's translating to some of the global companies as well, discarding that ethos. I just wonder where that will land us in the United Kingdom, because we know that sometimes, what happens in the United States, comes over here as well. So I was just thinking, what is your thought about whether we would go back on our own sort of Equality Act that's been kind of like been embedded?
Happy to take that.
Yeah.
I don't see any problems with our Equality Acts, and I have no fear for it. The problem with the states is that they turned diversity, equity, and inclusion into a form of racial discrimination. Remember, the lawsuit against Harvard University and the University of North Carolina was brought by Asian, and in this context, in America, Asian means Chinese and Japanese students who were being discriminated against by Harvard because they were being not admitted to allow lower quality black students, lower quality in terms of their grades, their test scores, etc., into the university. In that lawsuit, my sympathies were entirely with the litigants, the Asians. I believe the United States Supreme Court reached the correct decision. Now, Trump is an awful person. It's a monstrous moral outrage that they've taken Colin Powell off the wall at the Pentagon because he's black. But two wrongs do not make a right. What Trump is doing was wrong. The way that DEI was being practiced by many people in the United States before was wrong. The idea that when you're being hired as a physicist professor at California University, you have to write some paper about why your study of theoretical physics will somehow advance diversity, equity, inclusion, it's just utter nonsense. I don't care what I want to do. What I want is a good theoretical physicist. As long as this person is not going to discriminate against black people when hiring research assistants, that's the only thing that matters.
Sorry, I have one question.
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. When you want to grow in your journey,
Yeah.
you will create certain rules. And you said don't go with the cheap level income and go with the one that you like it.
Yeah.
So how far we have to stand by our rules and how much we have to keep it. When we go to the work that even we like it, we are enjoying it, but there are sometimes disagreement. But we have to bend, have that.
I'm not quite sure I understand the question yet. So explain a bit more.
I'm sorry about that. It's not clear. For example, right now, myself and Zishan. We're good friends. It's 4 years we are working together. Obviously, he's the director and I'm the research lead. When we are working on the projects, we have discussions and we are not always in the same page.
Mm-hmm.
How far I have to build my boundaries to stand where I know I'm right. And I know later on he will say, oh, I'm sorry, I'm just using it as an example in front of everyone. No, I'm just saying it for example. But I'm saying, like, I know it, he will come around and will say you were right. But how far I have to stand back and say, okay, let him get there.
That's a really good question, and it's something I face all the time in the voluntary organisations that I run. Because I never run them solely, I'm always collaborating with other people. And sometimes human beings, can be very frustrating to collaborate with. And what I always remind myself in that situation is, how much does this particular point that we're arguing over, how fundamental is it? Is it life or death for the organisation, or does it matter if I sort of give in on it, bearing in mind that I want this other person that I'm disagreeing with to continue to care about the organisation and to help to take it forward. So a lot of the time I actually will give way on many things. If something is really fundamentally important, and particularly if it's a technical point, then the other person will give way as well. But life is full of dynamic tension of that nature. And the thing to always remember is, what is your overall objective? Your overall objective is to achieve something rather than to prove that you're right.
Yes, thank you. Just focusing on the aim.
Right. Yes.
Perhaps I could just ask another question.
Yeah.
We've talked about, obviously, how someone from a Muslim background or South Asian can be successful in the United Kingdom. And not just in employment, but we also know that there is fundamental issues about social determinant of health.
Yeah.
And I just wonder, how do we then overcome that? Because we know that it exists. So apart from the issues around what we've talked about potential of career progression, but fundamentally, how do we address the issues of housing, poverty, and other stuff that actually affect people, and which in fact can then affect their financial dependency, the health outcome, and of course their outlook in life. So what do you see in terms of what needs to be put in place for those group of people to overcome that? Because I think there is still a fundamental issue.
Right. Well, first of all, in my life, I've been really poor when I was very young, and now I'm one of the 1%. It's much nicer being rich than being poor. When I think back to the diet that my parents had and that I had when I was in the 1950s, when we were really poor, it was actually a very healthy diet. Being poor doesn't mean you have to eat badly. Now, I'm a really snoopy person. When I'm going around Asda with my wife shopping, I always look at other people's shopping trolleys. And I despair at the shopping trolleys of other people that I see. People who I know, because they live in Hume in Manchester, that they will be people much poorer than me. And the amount of money that they are spending on booze, crisps, biscuits, ready-made meals, junk, basically. The social determinants of health matter. There are things like bad housing which really need fixing. It can be hard, but a lot of it is self-destructive behavior. One of the first things I wrote when I started writing back in the late 2000s, which is on my website, is an article called Suicide by Samosa, How the Asian Diet is Killing Us. Because it was about the time I was starting to get really focused on diet and health. And I used to be a member of the Central Working Committee of the Muslim Council of Britain at that time. And I was really conscious how unhealthy was the food that they were giving us for the lunches at these Muslim Council of Britain meetings, like samosas. I mean, I like samosas as much as anybody, but I also know that about 2 samosas a year is about the right amount of samosas because they are so incredibly unhealthy. Many Asians will eat meat 10 meals a week. I have meat 1 meal a week. Most of the rest of my diet is vegetarian, and that's not because I can't afford the meat, it's for health reasons. The social determinants of health are really serious, but most of them point towards self-imposed damage by poor people. Poor people are far more likely to smoke in this country than rich people, even though cigarettes are expensive.
But I could also argue that perhaps there are other factors in terms of their level of understanding, language, the literature that I know that we do have in healthcare, interpretation of the leaflets, but at the same time, perhaps we need to do a bit of more work like we're doing right now in terms of some sort of community education, health education more, either in the GP practice or in the community. Because that is, in my experience, I've been a nurse as well for over 30 years. And sometimes I also question the level of public health that we put out there, whether it's actually reaching the people that we wanted to reach. And I quite agree with you, there's a self-inflicted health issues. But how can we then reach out more? Because the health of those people is also affecting the health of the nation and the budget in which we spend on healthcare. So I think it's something that still needs to be addressed.
I agree. Ignorance is a real problem, but the really big problem is that many people who are ignorant don't want to be told the facts. Like my own relatives, I've told my relatives about, and my relatives are not dumb. Many of them are well educated. They've been to university. They've got kids who've been to university. They still eat far too much meat. Think of the number of young people who smoke. There is not a single young person in this country who does not know that smoking kills. They're still stupid enough to do it.
Thank you.
I'm a very judgmental person.
I think that on that note, we should thank Mohammed Amin for his time and thoughts and everyone who's contributed to the discussion. We do have this room for a little bit longer, right? So we can have some snacks and some informal chats as well. There's lots of people too. Of course. Apologies. Yes. And so thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yes, thank you very much. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Wonderful to see you. Thank you for being here. And thanks to the esteemed speaker. Thank you very much for raising all the pertinent notes. Thanks to Luke, and many thanks to Huri for giving me this opportunity to present to you two songs that are in my native language, Nepalese. I know we're short on time, so what I'll do is I'll perform 2 different songs, only a few verses. Accompanying me in those songs are my faithful friend Madhav. He's a folk instrument from Nepal. From Nepal. And if he wants to say hello, it sounds like this. So that's him. The first song I present to you is, the narrative is about the mother and the father. So they are missing their daughter, the daughter who's been married away, but it's been years. They haven't seen her. She doesn't come around for the big gathering, big festivals, and whatnot. So the narrative is around that. Okay, so if we have that in mind. सल्लाह चाहिँ आमा सोसाइराहिन् सल्लाह चाहिँ आमा सोसाइराहिन् एकाले कोठामा अल्झेछ क्यारे पछ्यौरी तिम्रो चियाको बोटामा बल्झेछ क्यारे सुनको काँडा कलिलो खुटामा छोरीलाई आशिष हाल्न पाइन अन्तिम कालैमा भन्थे नि बाबाले आँसु झारी टिकाको थालीमा त्यही आँसु टिका पठाइदिऊ कि त्यही आँसु टिका पठाइदिऊ कि प्रवासको पातामा अल्झेछ क्यारे पछ्यौरी तिम्रो चियाको बुटामा बल्झेछ क्यारे सुनको काँडा कलिलो खुटामा. So that is one. It is. So, thank you. Now up to a slightly brighter and lighter in terms of narrative. This one, the narrator is sort of trying to persuade his potential lover. He's not even trying to persuade. He's actually trying to bribe the lover with promises of golds and ornaments, and a trip to the capital city of Nepal, which is Kathmandu. And it goes something like this. कान्छीलाई घुमाउने काठमाडौँ सहर रातो रानी फुले झै साँझमा तिमी फुल्यौ कलेजी माझमा मनको रहर कान्छीलाई घुमाउने काठमाडौँ सहर कान्छीलाई घुमाउने काठमाडौँ सहर बनैभरि लाली गुराँस बनै रमाइलो तिमी आए जिन्दगीमा मनै रमाइलो ओ सिन्दुर दिउला पोते दिउला माया भाकेर राम जस्तो तिम्रो मुहार दिलमा राखेर म त आको नौ डाँडा काटेर लाइदो माया तिम्रै हुँ भनेर मनको रहर कान्छीलाई घुमाउने काठमाडौँ सहर कान्छीलाई घुमाउने काठमाडौँ सहर. Thank you. Thank you for listening. Thank you again.